Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Just Another Kill Team podcast, connecting kill team communities across the globe. If you're passionate about the tactical skirmish game that brings together strategy, lore, and creativity, you are in the right place. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and stay updated with our latest episodes. If you want to support the show, check out our Patreon. Your support means a lot to us. Follow us by using the social media links in the podcast description for all the latest news, and be sure to leave a review to let us know what you think. Thanks for tuning in. Here's today's episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I already said that in the intro that was pre-recorded, but here we are again, officially starting the podcast.
The Kill Team's famed double hello makes it to Just Another Kill Team podcast.
The double hello.
I don't know if it's been trademarked though, so Glass, don't attack us, please.
Yeah. I'm sure Glass doesn't listen to us. But I'm sure that someone that listens to us also listens to Glass Half Dead. They're going to tattle on us.
That's probably true.
And then he's going to yell at us.
We're here with the world's moistest Wyrmblade player from the World Championships of Warhammer, Taz.
Hello. Definitely the moistest.
Yes, he dragged an incredible display board that was glistening, and every single model glistened a little bit, so... What I remember from the models, I was like, oh, Jason wants to bring Taz. And I was like, who's Taz? I was like, the moist Wyrmblade player. I do recall a purple-gray moist Wyrmblade player who was very nice. So we're here to talk about your boys in the new edition. What was your final record at Worlds? I'm just curious, because I don't remember what everyone's record was.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Well, first off, thank you very much for having me. It's an honor. And my record was 4-6 in the end, which... I wasn't super happy with, but it was all right. Had a few games that I definitely threw.
Yeah, that was actually one of my next follow-up question is you went 4-6 at Worlds.
Yep.
How many of those games were your mistakes versus how many games were like the rule set was hard because Legionary, Warp Coven, Angels of Death, all of these big scary wide teams cause issues? I know I've looked at Brood Brothers and Wyrmblade, and the difference between them as the two Genestealer cult teams in the edition is that Brood Brother have the fancier ploys, but Wyrmblade feel like they have the tighter models. I was kind of curious, like, how did you feel that at Worlds?
Yeah, so I had two matches that I think, and both against Higher Tech Circle, that I think are actually unwinnable if the opponent takes Psychomancer. Because the new Wyrmblade is still all about ceaseless rerolls, which are now nicer. Oh, sorry, it's just got a word. It's the same rule. And a lot of rending, and a lot of turn a novel into a crit, and proccing stun, and Psychomancer just says no. So those two felt unwinnable. My other matches, I felt like I should have won against both Legionary and Phobos, and to the point that I killed 5 out of 6 both times without issue, and then just messed up my turning point for priority with scoring, basically. Which I put down.
Was this a situation around like contain where you just like didn't realize you had to, or you like forgot to make it into your opponent's end zone? What kind of mistakes were you making on those scoring kerfuffles?
Yeah, so those were both in my first 6 games in the first 2 days, and the Legionary one was definitely around contain. I basically had the choice between trying to implant the last guy, trying to leave someone alive with an implant, trying to take a crit up, or trying to deny the contain. And I think we did the math, and there was like one line through there that would have worked, but I picked the wrong line and lost. And then the Phobos one was kind of similar, where I basically came down to the point where I was having to prioritize keeping someone alive with implant when it wasn't actually an efficient implant to do. And part of those 2 games actually led me to a pretty drastic change in strategy where I started because I had been taking tack up primary, and I made a pivot in...
Hello, everyone. Here's Jason in editing with a quick note that the call failed, so it's a little jumbly, but we resume the conversation now.
Both of you froze, and I thought maybe you would just pause very...
Yeah, I was like, that's an interesting word to pause on, Taz. And then I was like, it's not Taz, it's just the call.
Okay, and Basically, I'll just clip out the weird silence and just let everyone know that we got confused. Where were we? We were talking about the drastic change because you were doing TACOP before, and then you switched to a
Oh
giant
yes.
pause, which
I
I
was
know was
getting the
kill up.
vibe that you hit a contain issue very similar to Jason, where you're like, oh, I forgot to break contain. But it sounds like there's a thing after that against Phobos, if I remember correctly, now that I'm talking through it.
Yeah. So I switched from TACOP primary, which was making me focus on implant more than I needed to. Like I was sacrificing models to get implant. I was keeping things alive that I should be killing to get implant. And then I switched to kill up primary and set up this little logic for myself that if I was going to kill a model exactly, I would never implant and I would just kill the model. If I had overkill, I'd implant and kill the model. And other than that, I'd look at what breakpoints I was going to hit. So this is in the situation where I'm doing damage but not killing. And if it was, for instance, injuring someone, I wouldn't implant. But if it was just like a little bit of chip, I'd ignore the chip to implant. So once I sort of set up that logic and I was prioritizing killing and just scoring the crit up points when you can, because there's only usually ever like one or two situations where you actually need to think about the crit up. I was able to just score a lot better, and the whole team is so killy that it just started feeling really nice.
Yeah, it's shockingly more killy than people would expect. We did a game, and you tabled me, I think.
Yeah, I think so, and that's kind of like my experience with elites.
Yeah, you had learned all your lessons from Worlds, and then when we played, it was just like we both just went like full brutality, and it was a crazy game because I haven't run into another person that is just as like absolutely insanely reckless as I like to play. It was very interesting. I liked it a lot.
So have you continued playing Wyrmblade after Worlds, and have those learnings at World continued to just ruin people in your local games?
So I haven't been playing them locally because I've been playing Wyrmblade locally for 2 years, and everyone's very sick of me playing Wyrmblade. But I have been playing in the Command Point TTS tournament, CPTS.
Okay.
And yeah, I've been doing that strategy since I got back and haven't lost a game yet.
Yeah, so
which is,
okay.
where are we at in that right now?
For anyone in Wyrmblade territory struggling, murder your opponents as fast as possible.
Look, it's the kind of plan that I feel as soon as I come up against someone that realizes that that's what I'm doing, it's probably very counterable. But yeah, for now, it's a lot of fun. Where we're at with CPTS, I'm just about to have my top 8 game for the finals bracket in a few days. And then
Sick.
I guess if I win that, there'll be 2 more potentially. But it's knockout at this point. So if I lose that, then I'm out.
Yeah. Sweet. What are you up against next?
Nemesis Claw, actually.
Nemesis Claw. That's one of the other teams that we both geeked out a little bit about at Worlds.
Absolutely. Yeah. From what I have seen, it's against a European guy, and he plays them very aggressively, but not in like a melee hug situation, which is what we were talking about, more of a take gunners and just be killy kind of way. So yeah, that'll be interesting.
That will be interesting. So there's been a handful of cool tricks that you were popping off with Wyrmblade so far. Do you have any just like go-to synergies or combos or tricks that you do in every single game? Like what for like some real quick advice that will help anyone that is playing Wyrmblade level up?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of obvious once you think about it, but I didn't catch it first. The new Get Dancer Unquestioning Loyalty, where if you have a neophyte within 3 inches of an agent, works for both shooting and fighting, and it's 3 inches, and the agent just needs to be able to see the neophyte. So at some point before Worlds, I realized that was key to keeping my agents alive, and basically I always have a neophyte with the agent. I always move a neophyte to where I'm going to move the agent so that they're just kind of hopping from neophyte to neophyte. And that's made a huge difference. And that's not really like a spicy strategy. That's just a good Wyrmblade
Good foundation.
tip, I
Seems
guess.
like it's a big Gene Stealer cold kill team vibe. You always got to have Grandpa and take him out on a walk. Because
Yeah,
for the
yeah,
Brood
yeah.
Brothers, you kind of do the same thing, where you always have the Gene Stealer Patriarch floating around a neophyte because he just needs a bodyguard at all times. So you always got to
Yes,
take
yep.
Grandpa on a walk. I guess even when it comes to Wyrmblade, the grandpas are still there. They're just a little bit more sprightly compared to the Brood Brothers grandpas.
Yes, definitely. Another one that kind of just falls out of the stuff they have available. Last edition, they had spotlights, but it was 1 equipment point per person. This edition, you pick the option and all of the neophytes on the team get a 6-inch bubble where if they can see someone, that person can't be obscured by at all, which is very good. And we also now have access to smoke grenades. So that is a cheeky little 1-2 where you can smoke grenade or shoot smoke grenade or and then basically set up these non-reciprocal shots where you have a spotter further up the field who means that you can shoot someone still, even if you're in smoke or if they're in smoke, obviously. So that's
That's actually
nice.
pretty cool because the Spotlight's equipment says that anyone within 6 inches of the neophyte, as long as the neophyte can see you, you ignore obscurity. And smokes, for anyone who doesn't realize, after you pop smokes, generally people shoot, then pop smoke, because once you're in the smoke, you are obscured and you have all of the abilities of smoke. So you can instead do it in the reverse order and have other guys walk into the smoke that you already prepped from your other guy and then shoot through the smoke because you're firing through your bubble, right? So
Yeah,
you can set up
100%.
a forward base for your multiple gunners, drop a smoke after you take a shot, and then have your next gunner run into the smoke and then take a shot that your opponent isn't really expecting. Because they're like, oh, well, he's done. He's not no one else is going to be able to use that bubble. But as long as the spotlights are on, you still get another shot. And some of the Wyrmblade shooting is pretty good. The mining laser, 6 dice on 4s, 5-6 still, I think.
I think it's 5 dice on 4s, 5-6 piercing 1.
5
Notably,
on 4s, right.
when you stand still, you get ceaseless. If you also flip from concealed to engage, you get ceaseless. And those things, it's stated that they become relentless. So the shot can be 5 on 4s, 5-6, piercing 1, relentless, and then rending from the days at hand play. So it turns into a pretty gnarly profile. And that's kind of true across the whole team. You can take crack grenades and they get ceaseless and rending, which is delicious because you also have 2 GA2 warriors. So they can do things like, just jumping back to the smoke grenade thing, one could move, throw a smoke into the distance, the other one moves into that smoke and throws a crack grenade at someone and is safe. There's a lot of killing power on the team. I guess
So that's actually a fun segue because you're using a lot of the faction equipment and combining it with some of the second order principles of having spotlights, ignoring obscuring, and having your smoke being able to interact with all of that. But Wyrmblade also have one of the other interesting, player place equipments for explosive traps where you get to place extra mines. Is that a thing that's actually useful at high level play, or have you generally just avoided it? Because it sounds cool being able to pick 2 separate mines, but I don't actually know if it's good. Cracks are very powerful, spotlights very good, and smoke's obviously good as well. So curious if you take them regularly.
Traps are very much, well, they're both map dependent because of where you have to place them. There's some Into the Dark, well, Galadark maps that you just can't put them anywhere that's useful at all. That's just because of the new layouts, because they have to be 2 inches away from objectives and the doors. And then there's also, they do 4 to 6 damage. They don't interrupt anything, so how much they impact your opponent varies as well. But in the world where you have a good map and an opponent is going to care, like against elves, they're pretty gnarly. I've used them in a whole bunch of different ways, like blocking off a key corridor, blocking off access to the home objective. You can put a mine on either side of it, for instance, and regardless of how they try to get to it, they'll hit the mine. You can place them on vantage points, which is useful on Volcus against some of the surveillance teams that want to get up to the top vantage point. And notably, it doesn't block it off for yourself as well because you don't trigger them. So it's actually just a nice nice to have. Sometimes it's useful to block off a staging area for your opponent, just like on the center line. That's kind of less effective in high level play, I found, because people are able to just stage in a lot of different places. Like they'll work around that one the most. But kind of conversely to that, if you put it somewhere that you want to stage, then they either have to come to you and take the damage or just ignore where you're staging. And that's a much more useful way to do that. And then the last one that I do, particularly on one of the Gallowdark maps, is you can put a barricade down and a mine right in front of it. So you can have someone that's inside an inch of the back of the barricade, outside of the front, so they can't get charged. And then if someone wants to get within 2 of them, they're going to hit the mine because it's on the other side. And then if you stage that in a spot where the person behind the barricade can get to the center point, you essentially have a very safe staged objective person, which is usually just a warrior or something disposable that can move out and snag a point at a later point in time, which is, on that particular map, I think it's the one with the kind of big center room that's got the 2 little like parallel walls that are floating. You can put one of those little bunkers on either side of the wall, and then both of the flanks of the little barricades are protected, and you have 2 sides that can both get to the middle point, which is super powerful.
Man, you're making it so Australia is going to be the country of in the dark geometry episodes, because it's not the first time we've had an in the dark episode related to geometry and how you can finagle your way into a safe spot. Though, to be fair, this is a big part of In the Dark, because the boxes are roughly like a little less than 4 inches wide, and you put a barricade which is about 2 inches wide. You can definitely make some of the hallways like a little bit safe, and especially on the map that you're talking about, where you have the outer edge of a wall end, and you put another barricade there, suddenly you have a hard spot for an opponent to actually physically fit models, and then just dropping in a warrior that's just out of an edge of an inch back means that against some models they just can't jump over the barricade because there's nowhere to go.
Yeah, even better than that is you can set it up so that a 25 mil base will fit through that gap between the wall and the barricade, and then on top of that you put the icon bearer, who now has the similar Brood Brothers thing, where if I die within 6, I can do a shoot.
Superior Australian schooling coming into play. They just keep talking about the geometry.
So you put the Brood Brothers guy, the icon bearer, behind one of the wall ends, like close to your home door. So then they can't charge your warriors. They have to move onto the mine to shoot you. If they do kill you, you're within vision of the icon bearer, so you can shoot them back as a reaction before you die, which is all adds up to be pretty nice.
Especially if you throw a crack grenade or something.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you'll be injured. That's the one sad thing. So it's better with the shotguns that hit on 3s, because then you're injured, you hit on 4s. So it's still like that extra bit of damage. And this is after they've hit the mine for 4 to 6. They'll take a shotgun shot.
Basically a new combo that's come up in this edition, because the Icon Bearer didn't have the shoot on death ability in the last edition, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, correct. He the Icon Bearer in the last edition used to grant the optional Relentless on the heavy gunners, but that's just built into the heavy gunners now. Yeah, so he's now got the shoot on death or the mission action ploy for free on death. Sadly, both of those don't work in control range, so he only is useful against shooting. But there's another little combo that I've made with him, again on Gallowdark, where you can put the Weber on guard and have the Icon Bearer be able to see the Weber to cover the bit before you can go on guard again. And often this combo is again with the smokes. So the Weber will go on guard, drop a smoke on themselves. The Icon will be safe outside of, or within 6, but outside of charge range of anyone else. And then the way that guard works now, not reducing your hit stat, is nice, but the way that APL gets calculated with stun means that if someone charges you and you're on guard with a Weber that has severe and stun, if you roll 1 hit on, you'll be hitting on 4s because it might be point blank, they get -1 APL immediately. So a 2 APL operative can't charge and fight a Weber. 3 APL can't open a door, charge and fight a Weber.
And it's even worse
and
because if you get shot on your activation, the stun lasts until your next activation.
yeah.
So the ruling
Exactly.
for stun is very, very raw that if you get stunned in your own activation, next activation, it's still going to be there until you're done. So you get it for like 2 full turns. So do not
Yes.
charge something with stun. This comes up with, Corsair Void Guard with the Fel Arc with the stun pistol. Obviously, it
Yep.
would come up against Void Dancers too. And very grossly, it sounds like the Weber
Yeah.
on the
Severe.
Wyrmblade.
Se-
severe
yeah, the
severe
severe
stun,
makes it
not a keyword
guaranteed.
you charge into when your opponent's on guard. Don't touch it. And it's 12-inch
Yeah.
range. So the spotlight smoke combo means that the Neophyte Gunner can actually cover quite a bit of area just by vibing out on Gallowdark.
Yeah. I'll often set up a bit of a denied flank with the Weber, my leader, and the icon. I have my icon on the point behind a barricade, the Weber off in a corner somewhere, which is got a good view of the room, and then my leader on the other side, ready to charge whoever charges the Weber if they survive. And then have my leader still be able to see my heavy gunners across the map so that they can use the ploys for free.
So these are a lot of, it feels like Gallowdark centric tricks right now that we've been discussing.
Yes.
Do you feel like Wyrmblade are better on one of the 2 map types or all 3 map types? I don't really know if Australia's been playing a lot of Beta Decima, so I'm just kind of curious. Like, do you feel like you have an idea of which maps are better, or is it just kind of like even? It just depends on the scenario. Maybe you pick different agents for different board types. Like, I assume that the Calomorph is always take, and then the other 3 are kind of up for grabs. But I'm curious in the new edition.
Calomorph isn't always take. Calomorph is better somehow than last edition, despite hitting on 3s instead of 2s, because they get ceaseless on both shots now from flipping, and they also now have a hypersense profile instead of the having to spend an action to turn on hypersense. So hypersense is the seek light, ignore obscuring shot. But yeah, in terms of the maps, on Volcus, hiding is way better, and then on Gallowdark, all of the tricksiness with guard and the divert and disappear ploy for dashing also gets better. Like you can have a barricade a little bit back from a hatchway, and I think I did this in our game, Jason, where you can. I mean, I set it up a little bit poorly then because I blocked myself on one side, but you can have someone dash from the barricade to the hatchway or vice versa in the strategy phase, depending on whether you get initiative or not. Which is very nice. So that's another Gallowdark one. But yeah, on Volcus, the mines are a bit better. The hiding's a bit better. The spotlights in general, I feel, come up more. Well, maybe they come up equally on both because you're kind of taking shots around heavy either way. But yeah, I feel like they have play on both those two, and we don't really play any Beta Decima anymore. We were with the anticipation of Worlds playing it, but after that kind of got very squashed. No one is playing it anymore.
Yeah, that seems to be kind of the vibe that I've gotten from most places and most people we've talked to.
Yeah.
Oh man, but Wyrmblade do have a lot of new strengths compared to the end of last edition, where it felt like they were very much trapped by your opponent hitting the knowledge gap, and then suddenly your rules would not catch up to them. But now you've got spotlights, you've got extra attacks, you've got more powerful shooting attacks, you've got better defensive ploys, and all of your profiles have gotten a little bit better, even if your hit stats have gotten worse. So you just have more room to kind of make your stats your opponent's problems without relying on your opponent getting caught by some other trick. And some of the other tricks are also just easier to use now, right? Locus required you to set up your Quicksilver Strike. Now it is, like some other abilities in the game, just a once per turning point free action that moves ahead of your opponent, which just means that it's going to hit people, or your opponent has to give it a wide berth, and there's never a moment where your opponent can just work around it, right?
Yeah, 100%. They lost some of their cool tricks, like they can't punch holes in walls anymore, and a few other things.
That's for the Breaker Boys.
That's for the Breaker Boys now, yeah. But they gained.
That's all territory now.
Yeah, the stuff they gained is the rending on all shooting or an extra attack in melee, which that's from the Days at Hand, the strategy play, and that is the thing that has turned them from I feel like last edition they were score early, score fast, and then try to survive. Whereas now they're like just kill things and try to score as you go sort of team. At least in the way I've been playing them. And then divert and disappear for the dashes.
I think that's a pretty important thing to notice, because now the neophyte leader is an actual power melee piece, right? 8 attacks with 8 wounds, 5 attacks on 3s, 4/6 shock or 4/5 rending, or with the chain sword. Having 5 attacks means against any of the smaller teams, Inquisition Agents probably being the big one right now as far as what's allowed in the meta. It just means that against the other human-sized teams, a lot of your pieces now can actually do something dangerous. And when you've got the Cult Knives, 4 dice on, or 3 dice on 4s, 3/4 with 4 attacks instead, means that now every once in a while you actually just beat the Vet Guard or the other dude with 3 attacks in melee, right?
100%. 100%. And then that ploy has also kind of enabled some crazy things with some of the other operatives, like the sniper. I'll get into the shooting shot in a second, which is nuts, but the melee profile is actually 4 on 3s, 2/4. So that becomes 5 on 3s, 2/4, which is respectable as like a end of the game pivot to
especially
charging
if you
people and
do it as like a last minute thing where you jump out of the shadows, and then you have ceaseless, so you've got like a good chance of doing 5 to 7 dice looking for a critical, which can do 4 damage is an appreciable amount of damage against almost everything.
And you can upgrade a crit, and you can have rending and stuff. So like 5 attacks, like 2/4 that's like sneakily way better than you'd expect.
Yeah, so you can always spend a CP, once per turning point, to do Coiled Serpent to change a normal into a crit. And that means that even the neophytes with the cult knives can be a guaranteed 4 damage when you need it. Because 4 dice on 4s, you're pretty likely to get a hit on, then you just upgrade it to 4. But yeah, the sniper range profile has if you flip from concealed to engage, you get ceaseless on your 2-up profile. That's 3/3, Dev 3. You can spend an APL to get lethal 5. You can spend another APL to mark the target and ignore obscuring and get saturate. And if you've spent the CP, which you always do for the days at hand, you get rending. And then you also have the option to spend a CP to change a normal into a crit with Coiled Serpent. So it's like a 49% chance to get 4 crits, which is a
12 mortal wounds and then roll your save.
Damage.
Yeah, it's like 15
exactly.
at a minimum. And a 49% chance to get that.
Are you finding that 49% chance of 12 damage up front is good enough where you're taking the sniper more often? Because I know this is like a big contention point for the longest time, and I think we've had guests on all the way across the spectrum on whether or not the sniper was good in last edition. Is it good enough in this edition when Kellermorph and Locus still provide like the mobility, the damage, the aura? Or is the backline sniper with the ability to just drop 12 mortal wounds actually good enough now in your experience?
Yeah, in my opinion, it is good enough because the Locus is not quite as good into 14 wounds as it was into 12. So the Locus into 12 wounds was a monster. And would reliably get 1 kill and like sometimes get a 2nd kill depending on how things went, which is very good. But the 14 wound breakpoint kind of sucks for the Locus. So that's been my opinion, and I'm not obviously if you get some chip damage in first, then you can use the Locus. But there's so many other pieces on the team that like to go up and get close within, within 6 inches or closer. So I personally take the sniper into elites 100% of the time, and I think that's pretty much it. Because otherwise, against anything else, the Locus is decent, and the Locus is such a big denial piece that when he's decent, he's very good.
And I guess on the flip side, then the Sanctus Talon, the melee half of the Sanctus pair, doesn't really see a lot of play for very similar reasons to the Locus not seeing play.
Yeah, so the Sanctus Talon had a very brief moment at the end of last edition where you could justify him. It was only like a 45 to 50% chance of actually being able to do 12 damage with the stab. So that's gotten better. I think they actually got rid of the rider that it had to be 2 crits, because now it can just be 2 successes. But it got a whole bunch of extra restrictions, which kind of suck. So it's now a 2 APL action to do the assassinate, and you have to start not visible to the person that you charge and fight. You have to stay on conceal, so you can't get the ceaseless or the extra attack. Sorry, I actually got corrected on this the other day. You can get ceaseless because you start out of visibility, but you never get the extra attack from the days at hand.
You never
and
actually
you
flip
cannot.
from conceal to engage because the assassinate
Yeah,
has
yeah,
the rider that it has to be on it. It cannot be on an engage order
yes,
when it
exactly.
does the
And
assassinate action.
on top of all of that, you don't get the extra 2 inches from charging. So it's super hard to set up in a way that your opponent can't just play around. I love the idea of this dude running in with lethal 4 and doing 12 damage, and then dashing away and still having an APL left to do something else. But yeah, it's just not quite flexible enough for me. Any time that I think about taking the Talon, the Locus is just better.
The Locust is just an easier piece to use, right? There's less restrictions on the movement. You actually get more movement because you can do stuff at the end of your opponent's action. And Assassinate, while cool because it's only a 6-inch charge compared to the Locust's, free movement within 3, just has more restrictions. And even though you can charge from conceal and you can do all this crazy stuff, it's probably only really going to be useful once you're playing against like 10 wide teams with 10 wounds, right? Where the instant kill is both tangible and you actually have enough room where you don't want to put too much in one location, perhaps.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, I like similarly the idea of running him into elves, because if you roll 1 crit and 3 hits, you do 9 damage. I like that idea, but they're just gonna avoid it. Like there's nothing stopping a model that can move 7 inches from just not going within 6 inches of this dude, or within 7 inches of him.
Yeah, I think
then,
the only thing left for the Sanctus Talon matchup is basically you mind game your opponent into saying like, oh, I can only do the special ability with a 6-inch charge, and then they get used to that, and then you spring the 8-inch full charge on them.
Yeah,
So there's
the
probably
regular.
an element of mind games where you're just like, man, this is so hard to use. You just kind of pretend, and then the moment their guard gets let down, you like snap the trap on them.
Yeah.
But that's probably a little silly, and definitely leans into kind of the meme that Wyrmblade players always try to pull the wool over your opponent's eyes.
100%. The Locust has some other utility, again, with the fantastic new strategic plays we have. Divert and Disappear, if you're on engage, you can do a 3-inch charge. So I tried to do this play, and it's a little bit of a risky play, but I tried to do it against Bart. He was my first opponent at Worlds, and it went terribly. But in theory, it's good. Where at the end, so turning point 1, to get maximum distance, you could scouting reposition him forward 3 inches, and then you move dash him forward another 9 inches to get within 4 inches of somebody. And if you're taking stun grenades, you throw a stun grenade at them. Or if you're within 3 inches and they're valid for whatever reason, you can use your silent tail. Oh, actually, sorry. Slight correction. You have to do this on engage, because you going into turning point 2, you then are able to charge 3 inches in the strat phase. So you've essentially gone 3 and then 9 and then another 3 for 15 inches before you activate on turning point 2. And you're in control range of someone, so you can murder them and then charge the full 8 to someone else, murder them, and then charge 3 with his follow-on to kill 2 people and tie up another one. But the risk of it all is that you're not flipping from conceal to engage, so you lose ceaseless. So it's very dicey. And that
and
plus
you did this against
Cigarette's
Bart,
Jest.
who was fighting Void Dancers at Worlds.
Yeah.
So you went in
between
5
that
dice
and
on
Jest,
3s. Ooh, and he got the Jest on you, right? I think when Bart was on here, he talked about how basically in every game there's going to be one sequence where Kregarek's Jest is going to come up and you stall 2 dice on your opponents, like they go to hit you and like, oh, you missed 2 of your dice. Sorry, bud.
Yep. So I had managed to pull that off to get in engagement with, or control range with, the Shadow Seer he'd staged it behind a building. So I'd gone up a ludicrous distance and then whiffed both fights and died. So it went terribly, but if it had worked out, I would have killed the Shadow Seer and then been able to charge into the Death Jester, probably kill the Death Jester, and then charge into a player. So look, high risk, lost terribly, but it was fun. So yeah, there's lots
Making
of new players with the team.
doing your best impression of the Hearthkin Salvagers in Kill Team 3.
That's it.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
wow.
definitely a cool way to use the Locust. I mean, there are definitely a couple other slingshot models and opportunities across all of the teams. You know, slingshot opportunities were a big part of the last edition of Kill Team, but obviously in this edition of Kill Team, with, you know, the first turn being so much more dangerous, you know, like it's not as easy to get away with. Whereas like in last edition, if your opponent didn't have any engaged models, you could like, oh, I just got free range to do whatever you want, just end up in a really aggressive position, don't get punished for it. Now, when you do that, you're always risking your opponent pulling out a gun and starting to shoot first, right?
Yes. Yeah, and I guess when I first started playing in third edition, I saw that you could use Divert and Disappear 10.1, and I saw that the Kelimorph now had the profile instead of having to spend an APL for Hypersense. And I thought, why am I not just repositioning Divert and Disappear, be 6 inches up the board, and then last activation 10.1, flipping to engage, move dashing, or move shooting twice with Seek Light. But your opponents just play around that because there's no reason for them to come out. So a lot of the 10.1 Alpha Strike just inherently is kind of gone anyway because there's no reason. So it's just a zoning piece, and then you've exposed, especially with Wyrmblade, you're literally your best operative, which just isn't that good anymore.
Yeah, I mean, you could try to do something like that. Well, yeah, it is easy to play around, but if you can come up with something else that like puts pressure out there, like dangle another threat, and stage it on a mine, like you were mentioning earlier. Maybe there's some high tempo craziness there, but who knows?
Yeah. The Locust sitting on the mine in the midfield is very nice because if someone tries to shoot him, he can flip to engage and charge them first. If they charge him, they'll hit the mine, and then the Locust, when someone's taking 4 to 6 damage, is very good. Especially because I'm never taking him into elites anyway. So that 4 to 6 usually puts them within crit range with lethal 5. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Wyrmblade definitely, of the two Genestealer Cult teams, I think that they are the better one right now in the current edition. Did you ever get a moment when you were thinking about playing Brood Brothers, or do you have like a even moister version of the Brood Brothers floating around in the back of your opponent?
So I actually got halfway through making Brood Brothers at the end of second edition, and I was doing the exact same scheme and basing it all very moist, very purple, tentacle-y. And I was a huge fan of playing with the Magus and the assets, which let you do something as an activation. And then they lost the assets, and that just turned me off the team. I know that they haven't really changed that much, but that was like, I just got so much enjoyment out of like using an activation to do this
cheeky thing that just bothers your opponent. So in the last edition of Kill Team, for any of the new listeners who've only played the new edition, which I've got to assume is a vanishingly small subsection of our community, but you know, who knows, there was an ability for Brood Brothers to replace one of your operatives or one of your specialist operatives with this weird activation, one of them being a weird stun activation, another one being a free crossfire token, and then the other one being an extra dude that just shows up on some board edge, right? I think those are the 3 that I remember off the top of my head.
Yep, pretty sure.
And
they were fun.
Obviously,
so yeah, when they lost
not maybe the most powerful thing to do, but you know, having kind of like a free ploy that's always there that gives you effectively balanced at whim is probably not the worst thing in the world. It's just you were weighing it up against, you know, 2 soul sight familiars who would just run around and like cheese your opponent's line of sight and just get their heads blown off, right?
Yeah. The familiars, and I mean, look, the familiars and the Magus is still, I mean, it's very valid now, and I think that's like, if I was to play the team, that's how I would play them. But yeah, I kind of just lost a little bit of interest there, and then I saw the Wyrmblade changes, and then I was in love.
Yeah, Wyrmblade got some of the the best tools from the Brood Brothers as far as like the offensive tools, but none of the cheeky kind of like sneaky tools. They are way more forward facing, way more aggressive, and their tech pieces are just the best killing operatives that the Genestealer Cults have right now. Because I mean, the Patriarch is good, but with 21 wounds and hitting on 3s, there's non-zero chance that even with Relentless and Rending that he's just going to kill one thing and then kind of get stuck. Or maybe he just doesn't even kill a Marine sometimes now.
Yes. But yeah, I haven't actually played them in 3rd edition, mostly because of that.
Yeah, I mean, when you have the ability to just take your leader, who now has 5 attacks, or your sub leader with 5 attacks, and just go delete a Marine every once in a while after it's taken a little bit of chip damage from some shotguns, nice.
Yeah, for sure.
And it sounds like you've mostly been playing, to bring it all back as like a holistic strategy thing, because I think Wyrmblade, compared to some of the other teams, are a team that you really can stage out a full, like, I have a plan that I'm going to do starting from turn 1 all the way to probably like turn 3, where you stage out like your dork objectives to go run out in the middle to bait your opponent, while you have your gunners in the back line, and then your mid-board cult agents ready to spring on whichever weak point shows up in your opponent's board, while your spotlights are blocking out all this obscurity. You're taking infiltration most of the time, it sounds like.
Yeah. I feel like so one of the major things when thinking about TAC ops is how many APL you have, because seek and destroy TAC ops feel like they're designed for 3 APL, and Wyrmblade have 2 operatives that are 3 APL, but they're very, very glass cannon. So killing something and surviving on your opponent's half for overrun is never gonna work, and then getting a double kill, you maybe can get 2 double kills in the entire game, because if both your Kalimov and your Locust get a double kill, that's fantastic, but you're never going to get a 3rd one because there's no comms.
With 9 wounds, it's also just a melee piece that goes in generally is going to take some amount of chip damage in the first fight, even though they almost always win that fight.
100%.
And with 9 wounds, after you're done with that fight, you get maybe 1 more, or maybe your opponent comes up and just blows your head off, right? So getting the second double kill 10 really is pretty hard.
Yes. So I've noodled around a little bit with storm objectives. I've struggled every time I've taken it, because while I can kill everything on the objective, I often don't survive, which is kind of the theme of the team. Able to kill stuff, but when you're killing things, you're punching up, but then you're also dying. So none of the seek and destroy ones feel good. I wish wiretap worked better, but it's just kind of not good. And then surveillance, again, with not having any comms, being able to launch someone up the board to surveil isn't really an option. Like, I can move 6 and surveil someone within 2, but I could just move 6 and shoot someone. So yeah, implant all the way.
That seems like a pretty clean, reason why you take off every single other TAC op. So makes sense to me that implant. And it's funny because implant was the way that the team used to play. That nothing has changed. It seems like in 3 years of kill team development, it turns out that Wyrmblade, the moistest of the teams, just wants to put something inside of you.
Yeah, 100%. If they had something like the old gather surveillance where you just had to run to a spot, maybe.
And it's funny because for the teams that like surveillance now, they really like surveillance, but it's because they teleport to the other side of the map and then just take pictures of you endlessly, and they don't actually walk around on the map. They can just appear and make it your problem.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Wyrmblade definitely good. We talked about how obscurity and spotlights are giving you the ability to open up all these different game plans, the ability to shoot through your own smoke, have crack grenades that pop out of things that your opponent aren't really expecting. You've got your 12 damage mortal wounds with your sniper on elites. You've got your Calamorph, who's just, as always, the 3-armed bandito who saves an entire planet and sends it to the star gods.
Yeah. And I think maybe the one thing we haven't touched on is the new hiding, which is almost really good, but not quite. So it's sort of just like a flexible deployment, which in itself is very good, and like a budget ladder for gunners.
It is also nice because it's free compared to before we had to pay for it.
Yes, that is very nice. I think the one thing that really holds it back from being good, I know a lot of people talk about the heavy gunners being heavy dash now being part of the reason why it's not good, and sure, like that is true. But I think if you could drop in within 6 of enemies instead of having to be wholly outside of 6, suddenly you can drop goons in with shotguns or goons with crack grenades, goons with stun grenades. So many more options. Because at the moment I'm basically just using it to flexibly deploy, and it's nice because if you're deploying second, your opponent has to deploy 2/3 of their team before you even put anyone on the board, so you can let them show their plan or spread out, and then you can set up that on Galadoc, for example, that denied flank where you've only got the 3 operatives on one side anyway. But yeah, it's almost a very, very good ability, and it's currently just pretty good.
Yeah, there's like a couple things that you did in our game with hiding and pointed out that I thought was really interesting. One of them was you took one of your group activating goons and put him in hiding, and then that gave you one more activation, which I thought was clever.
Yes.
And the other one was
goal this time.
Yeah, exactly. But like a nice tech piece for one of the units to be in hiding is the Weber, because it does have enough range to jump in from hiding and still shoot someone with a Weber anyways. Was there any other, like, sometimes plays in situations of, like, someone else that might jump out of hiding and shoot?
I was just thinking on that note, like, have you thought about taking the autogun at all just for that turn one, just like pull the ripcord, just because you can set hiding and get a shot off that your opponent like isn't expecting? Has it ever really played into it? Like, a single dork of a GA2 pair has an autogun, so you can just deploy them and just get a shot off and make your opponent interact with you.
Yeah. I've considered it. I feel like the Flamer or the Weber, or the grenade launcher, basically just the regular gunner, fits that role quite nicely, and it's like actually a bit of a threat. Whereas 4-on-4s, 2-3 is maybe if you get really lucky, going to do something. Even with ceaseless,
yeah, it's not going to do that much,
And like as Jason said, I always split up one group activation because you get 4 hiding slots now. You can actually split up 2 if you really wanted to, which I do just against commandos to try to deny the Grot surveillance on turning point 2. But the one guy that I always put in hiding and always passes turning point 1, he will drop in usually and tap my back objective. So I don't actually even have to think about putting someone there. He's just able to drop and tap, unless my opponent's already in my deployment zone, basically. So the other tricks that I've done with hiding, kind of, I guess, a bit more Galadoc stuff. You can drop in a heavy gunner and go on guard, which is very good because they have the heavy weapon bipod to get ceaseless. So they're shooting as they were last edition, which was already decent. They don't get the like relentless or the rending, which are both really juicy, but still very nice. You have the option to be very aggressive and very flexible with hiding. So you could drop in and dash, and then days at hand dash. Divert and disappear dash as the strategy phase for turning point 2, and you've potentially got a heavy gunner that hasn't moved 12 inches up the board, which is a bit of a risk, but can be very good. I personally do it more, and I've had very good results doing it with the Flamer or the Weber, because they can either hit a bunch of people if it's the Flamer and you're far enough up that someone wasn't expecting you to be there, or the Weber is somewhat a defensive piece because of the severe and stun. If you get someone off on their own and you suddenly are able to move within 2 and shoot them, they'll survive. Maybe they're injured, and then they're hitting you back, and that's it, which is kind of nice. So yeah, I dropped those 2 in, dropped the heavy gunners on guard.
Those are like the backfield objectives, or sometimes
backfield objectives.
You can like hiding them and get them into a room early, and have your opponent have to manage it, guarding 5 attacks on 4s, 5/6, pierce 1, heavy mining laser, and there's no way to know if it's going to actually hit your opponent, but your opponent also has to deal with the fact that like every once in a while that will hit, and you'll get 3 hits, and your opponent's like, oh well, I guess I lost that 7 wound guy that I was going to take a calculated gamble on.
Yeah. The other 2 kind of nice ones, the leader being able to drop in means that you can actually flex where your melee threat is, which is cool on a team that he's often the only melee threat, or into elites usually when I take the sniper, or he's one of two with the locus. And then the icon bearer, you can sometimes set up a cheeky objective steal. Again, just by being flexible with the extra APL for control.
Yeah, very powerful stuff. Super flexible, very cagey, and also with a 5-up save and 7 wounds, you don't really have a lot of wounds to go around or the action economy to really. Once a flank is lost, you don't send more guys to go deal with the flank, right?
Yeah. You basically just have to play like if you engage someone with somebody, you're gonna lose your operative. It's always you're always trading.
Yeah, it's just the whole name of the game with Wyrmblade is hit first and then die.
Yes. Yep. And if you hit and survive, that is just icing.
An incredibly rude bonus, as we like to call it in the business.
Yeah, exactly.
And I guess on that note, a plan of generations in the making now is the way that you get all of that to tie together into a nice, neat little bow, right? Where if you stand on an objective, you get the shot off and your opponent kills you, suddenly your 2 APL operative, now it's getting incapacitated, and it hits the button on the way out and gets to perform a little 3 APL bonus.
Absolutely. I've found that at a high level, competitive players just play around that. They'll just beat me to death because it's not hard to do instead of shooting me. If that ploy worked in control range, it would be ridiculously good. But as it is, it's a nice to have. Sometimes it comes up. Sometimes you get a point. But yeah.
It'd be pretty sick and pretty thematic if it did work in control range. I mean, like, there's a precedent for stuff like that to work like that. We have Larcenist with the Ratlings, and we have Poach with the Farstalker Kinband.
Yes. Yeah, I've been playing a little bit of Ratlings alongside Nemesis Claws, like the two teams that I've been playing locally since getting back. And Larcenist, insanely good.
It is.
Yeah, being able to go crit up primary like comfortably and just throw a Ratling at a point each turn to guarantee going 2-1 is it's very strong.
Yeah, definitely more powerful on the crit ops where you score immediately during a turn, and very not as good on crit ops where you score at the end of the game.
Yeah, and the ones where you have to like control something at the end of each turn, that obviously doesn't really do anything. But I played a game of Secure yesterday, and my opponent just couldn't deal with the fact that I had 2 operatives, like 1 operative for each, his objective and the center objective, that I could I knew I was going to activate last, and I could get to that objective and just steal it.
Yeah, it's on him at that point to be proactive and go send stuff into the Ratlings to go squish them, because at 6 wounds, it's pretty easy to beat them. But if you're trying to play a defensive KG plan against the Larcenist operatives on Secure, where your opponent can always, Uno reverse the control as the last thing, you can't do the defensive game plan. Crew have the same
wait you and
pattern.
steal your objectives.
Yeah, and that's historically where Poach and Larcenist and abilities like that have been good on wider teams against the smaller teams, where your opponent's like, well, if I just wait it out, and you're like, sucker, and you just... Which I guess, as a consummate Wyrmblade player is a thing that you've kind of gotten used to, being able to Uno reverse a lot of situations is very important to every Wyrmblade player, it feels like.
Yeah. When I started this edition, I was playing a very cagey game, and I ran into those problems with Implant. I think if they had access to another tack up that was a bit more reliable, that also didn't lean into killing so much like Implant, which is kind of funny that people say that Implant's like anti-killing, but I think it actually synergizes really well.
It depends on you have to break out of the old edition framing where you need to max out everything if you're going to go with a more kill op centric plan, because really the big bonus on kill op is it throws your opponent's scoring game kind of off kilter, because you're putting all of this energy into something your opponent is only kind of putting themselves into. And in the process of killing your opponent, if you just break parity on scoring in one of the other 2 metrics, then your kill up is going to be up by 2 or 3 points, and your opponent is suddenly not going to have points in a bucket that they normally expect to.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of Implant, that's kind of one of the things that Jason and I were talking about at Worlds with Nemesis Claw, was running Implant with chain snares and charge, fight, Implant, parry out, hug. And
Yeah.
yeah,
It's
score
very, very Night
while
Lords.
being aggressive.
Because
Just
it's
to bring the
literally
noble
just like,
21st century sport of boxing into our 31st millennium, you monsters.
yep, yeah, it's just Night Lords play with your food before you eat it, because you just beat the enemy to an inch of their life and then score points from them, and it's just incredibly, incredibly thematic. And there's like some crazy combos there where, like, let's say I'm fighting against Corsairs and I get them down to 1 health and I implant them, and then you fight me and you get like 3 crits and I have 1 hit, but you have like you could kill me if I just try to parry you. So instead, you do dirty fighters and you kill them before they even swing once. And then you could even pair that with proclivity for murder to go hug someone else.
Yeah,
Proclivity
yeah,
for murder is
it's
after
so much fun.
you win a fight, you can charge up to 3 inches. It's a firefight ploy. Dirty Fighter, also shouting out what that is, it is also a firefight ploy, so this would be a 2 CP combo, but it would be extremely potent. And that is when you are being attacked, you can resolve 1 hit before your opponent, but if you do so, you can't resolve any other hits. But that's perfect if you've beat someone down to 1 hit and they're about to do serious damage to you.
All right, well, fine. You guys have forced me to ask. Have you done this, Taz? You guys talked about it at Worlds. That was a full 2 months ago. Have you had a chance to implement this horrifying Nemesis Claw strategy at your locals? And if so, how was the ability to chain snare up with Nemesis Claw, run over to someone, squish them down to 3 wounds, and then just stand there while teasing them?
I have, and it's so much fun. It's just such a breath of fresh air after playing a horde team to have extra APL that you're not even necessarily using because you're just up in someone's face so efficiently. And yeah, I run it like dropping. I don't take any gunners. I take a warrior, and everyone's moving up. The poison guy poisons the center objective if possible, or even just the back one, and then moves up. And speaking of the poison guy and implant, something Jason pointed out was that because it's 2-0 Dev 3, the crit damage goes through, and then you can still implant with the 0, which is very, very nice.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's been great. I'm very slowly. I previously built a Khorne Legionary team for 2nd edition using Age of Sigmar Khorne models as the basis for a kit bash, and I'm slowly extending that out to Nemesis Claw. Yeah, which has been a lot of fun. And yeah, between them and Rattlings, I think those are my 2 teams to go between, and I'll probably throw in an elf team for a bit of variety for the next little while.
That is very fun. Do you have any like tournaments or anything coming up that you're preparing for?
We've got a few small local ones. We're kind of in this funny situation where our local stores are starting to be supportive and try to run events, but they're not really getting. They don't have anyone that actually plays the game at the stores, and as in the staff, and then B, they're not like fully reaching out to get community members to help. So they're kind of throwing these events, and it usually means we just kind of get whatever terrain they have on site. But then we, like, when we're actually there, all of the competitive players sort of end up running it. So it ends up being a good event, but just with weird terrain. So those, we've had a few of those, and we have a few more of those coming up. But then we have a big event down in Sydney that's run by Bands, who is a bit of a name here for tournament organizing. I think that's
We may have heard of him.
May or the end of April. And then we've also, locally to Brisbane, we've got a guy named Ian who runs a little tournament organizing persona, I guess, called Tabletop War Masters. And he runs very, very tight ship with his events. They're always excellent. And he's got one coming up in April or May as well, which I'm very excited for. It's going to be our first 7-rounder, which is probably a little bit excessive in terms of rounds for the number of players we end up getting, but it'll be fun nonetheless. So it'll be 4 rounds day 1, and then a top cut of 8 for 3 rounds day 2.
Definitely a little bit of a marathon, 7 rounds.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, I think like a year and a half ago, I think we did like 6 or 7 rounds at our local like our biggest tournament, which is called Renegade in November. And we've generally been getting like 20 players, so we don't have like a huge scene, but like it is. I mean, 20 players is a fun event. And I think like a year and a half ago we did like 6 rounds maybe, and it was just like it was a huge just mulching pit where you could lose a game and still win the whole thing.
Yes.
It was fun. I like that.
It does make for a good time.
How has the Australian scene kind of grown in general? You know, we've had a couple of Australians on here, you know, throughout the runtime of our podcast. But I'm just kind of curious, as a player, a competitive player who went to Worlds, you paid for Worlds, you know, what has the kind of experience been watching your scene grow over time? Because, you know, back when we first had bands on, I feel like, I think he's Melbourne? Or is he?
He's from Sydney.
He's Sydney. Okay. So like the Sydney area was kind of where a lot of the larger tournaments were, but we have a lot of listeners from Melbourne and from Sydney. So it's gotta have felt like there are more people coming in all the time.
Yeah. I'd say that the like real competitive core is in Sydney. That's where Alexa and Liam and Sam and Emma and a whole bunch of others all live, and they all play together, and they're all very good. So they're just forever getting better. And then I hadn't had any interaction with the Melbourne scene until Worlds, and there were a few players from Melbourne that went to Worlds. They were lovely. And then I'm myself from Brisbane, and I feel like I describe our scene as kind of younger. When the Tabletop War Masters event started running was kind of like the start of us taking competitive play seriously, which is where I got my golden ticket from one of his events. I think, we're kind of at a really nice point where we've got lots of new players coming along to our like weekly game nights, and we've also got a bunch of people that are like returning for tournaments and that sort of thing. And I think a lot of people are realizing that tournament play doesn't have to be a painful, sweaty thing. It can be get a dense amount of games in and just have fun and learn a lot. So I think we're in a really good spot in Brisbane. Can't really speak to that level of localness for the other 2 states.
Nice. Well, if you make sure that we get all the links for upcoming tournaments, we'd love to make sure that any of our reasonably large Australian listener base has access to those links, if they don't already, because, you know, Good Times Rolled, I'm sure has a lot of it. And I'm sure there's other regional Australian Discords that are floating around out there.
Yeah.
All right, Taz, thanks for coming on, talking to us pretty in-depth about the new Wyrmblade. I think they sound pretty exciting, but obviously it is kind of like a niche team for a niche audience, because Wyrmblade and Genestealer cults are not the most popular 40k army, but they do have some of the cooler heroes of the overall kill team game, right?
Yeah. My dream would be, because Wyrmblade's unfortunately cycling out, if they brought back a similar team, but kind of more like an elite style, and you just have a bunch of the characters. That'd be sick. But that's probably never going to happen because it doesn't quite fit the theme.
Probably not. I would assume that they would maybe they would go with the aberrant. You know, you get the hero aberrant and a couple other aberrants, but I kind of expect that the Brood Brothers are going to be the representation of Wyrmblade or Genestealer cults for at least the foreseeable future. And they definitely have some similar vibes, but they're not quite the same aggressive punch as they used to be.
Yes.
Cool. Well, and as always, thank you, listeners, for listening.